During World War II, 16 million Americans served in the United States Armed Forces. Today, August 2020, there are less than 325,000 still alive. One of those is my father, Thomas Roy Lowe, better known as Papa, to his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and yes, his great-great-grandchildren. They are the crown of my mom and dad, who, by the way, are about to celebrate their 74th wedding anniversary. Wow. Well, in 1943, when my father turned 17, he joined the United States Marine Corps. Little did he know he would end up fighting in the last and bloodiest battle of World War II, the Battle of Okinawa. This is his story.
Right now, I'm 95 years and 4 months old.
How long will it be? How old am I?
93.
93.
93
oh,
years
but
old.
it's not 93 yet. It's just next week,
September the 27th.
Now, the question y'all are always asked is, what does it take to be married for 74 years?
You gotta live a long time.
Okay. That's number one.
That's number one. Number two is, you've got to learn how to compromise all the time.
Okay.
And number three, you got to learn to say, darling, I'm so sorry that I made that mistake.
Oh, yeah.
We met in 1946. I got home from the Marines. I remembered I had a letter somewhere from my aunt about a girl in Fort Worth. So I called my aunt up. Do you have that girl's phone number? She said, yes, I do. She gave me that phone number, and I called her up. She not only accepted, she went on a date with me. Now the surprise is after she saw me at her door, she still went. She still tries to explain how she made that mistake, but it doesn't work. But she did. We went on, we started going together, and she displayed without any effort that gift of love that just fills everybody else with a sensation of peace and harmony and happiness. And I needed that. I needed that kind of a inspiration in my life. And she fit in with what the Lord had prepared for my life to be from that time on. And so we had such a good time together. We went to Weatherford and made it official. And then we declared to the whole family that we had done that. And we've been married ever since. For 73 years now, we have been serving the Lord together.
He was, I knew how smart he was. And he spoke right, and he was just a really good man. And he was always so precious to me. He's always been so happy with us. You know, we just had a happy life.
After the war, you enrolled in college. Tell us about that.
And so, in the spring of 1946, or the fall of 1946, I went down to enlist in the TCU, and I learned that a married man could get a little bit more money going to school. So between my service and being married, I got $150 a month to go to TCU, and that plus a lot of part-time jobs. For 3 years, I was being educated to do what God had prepared me for my whole life. In science of manufacturing and business, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, that was a total surprise. We knew that they were enemies, but not imminent. My best friend named Foy Bradford and I went down to the movie. This was on a Sunday. We went down to a movie. We got out of the movie and the news was out. Pearl Harbor has been bombed. We were just really shocked. We were living in some strange situations in the United States anyway. Food was being rationed. Gasoline was being rationed. Men were being drafted. We did not see anything endangering our lives until that day. Suddenly we realized if they're bombing Pearl Harbor, we will be going soon. That is how I remember Pearl Harbor. I started thinking about the Marines when I was 15 years old. I had an uncle named Felix Kincaid. He had a photographic memory, but during all the battles that were going on over in Europe, got a lot of attention, and he would tell me about all of the battles that were being fought, but he distinguished between the Marines and the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, and that appealed to me. That appealed to my nature, and so I started preparing for the day when I would either be drafted or I could join the Marines. Well, when I was 15, I was not eligible to join the Marines or the Navy. My mother wouldn't let me join when I was 17. So I started thinking about what I could do to be ready when that time came. But that's when I was 15, that's when I started planning to be a Marine. I actually joined in 1943, just before I was 18. I had a friend named Terry Smith. We were walking down the street, going up to Bias's drugstore, and he said, "Roy, let's go join the Marines." Well, that was music to my, I said, let's do it. So we went down to the Marine enlistment place and told them we want to join the Marines. And that was about March. So we joined, and we had to take a physical. Had to get a permission from our parents. We took care of all that, and we got a physical. Now that was the first handicap. All my life, I had poor vision, poor hearing. Well, both of those were in part of our physical. After the physical, I passed. Terry Smith said, "Roy, you passed, but you just barely did. Your vision's not very good, and your hearing's not very good either." But I was a Marine. And so we officially became a Marines on May the 5th, 1943. We left Fort Worth on a bus. His family, Terry Smith's family was there, my family was there, my girlfriend was there. Her name was,
It didn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
No.
She lost.
Mary Catherine Fowler.
Mm-hmm.
Her brother was one of my friends. She was a little girl that lived up the street from me for several years. Well, anyway, we dated, and she was there at the bus to see me off. So my family and my girlfriend were there to get on that bus. Well, a lot of hugging and kissing and a lot of tears. And Terry Smith and I got on that bus to drive to Dallas to get on a train with a sleeping bunk in it to go to San Diego, California.
Do you remember anything your mother told you before you left?
Be careful.
Be careful.
Went to boot camp in San Diego, California. I remember that first day in boot camp. As we drove into the camp, we met all the Marines were already there. They all had the same salutation. "You'll be sorry." With that exception, they all, "You'll be sorry," all the way to our first day in the Marines. Originally, we learned how to drill as a platoon and as a battery, but we just learned how to drill, and then we learned to went to the rifle range. We learned how to fire a rifle, and then we went to qualify swimming. Marines always started a battle on a ship. Just got on the ship to go to a battle. Well, you had to qualify as a marksman. You had to qualify as a swimmer. I qualified as a marksman. We fired offhand at 200 yards. On the ground, 300 yards. And then from 500 yards. Well, I just barely qualified because of my vision. But when it came to swimming, some of the boys couldn't swim. Well, you couldn't go home from boot camp unless you passed swimming. So I passed my swimming, and then I made out like I was two other men. I qualified for them to swim. I used their dog tag so they got to get out of boot camp and go home. So I qualified 3 times swimming. I was born with a mouth that had the appearance of a smirk. I inherited that. I had an uncle, his name was Bill, my father's younger brother. He had a smirking lip. I got that. I had a smirking mouth. Wherever I went, people would ask me, why are you smirking? Why do you look that way? Well, we were standing with a rifle at attention, being inspected. And this man inspecting troop came to me. He said, I don't like that smirk on your face. Turn your back to us. So I had to turn around. While I had my back to them, I was the only man that faced them with my back.
Dad, your father was a hero. He died saving another man's life when you were 4 years old. Can you tell us about that?
I remember the last day I saw my father alive. He kissed me goodbye as he was going to work. And he started getting in the car, and I said, but Dad, you didn't kiss my mother. Oh, I'm not going to kiss that woman. You got to kiss my mother. No, 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 no. So finally I said, oh, all right, I'll kiss her. He kissed her and got in the car and drove off. Well, that was the last time I saw him alive. He went into a storage tank that had poison gas in it. And in 30 seconds after he went down in there, he was dead. I never heard anything else for a long, long time. I never heard about the hero helping somebody. I never knew that. I just knew that he went down there and died. Well, my non-coms were all veterans of the Battle of Guadalcanal. That was a long, long battle, not with only Japanese, but with insects, and the terrain was terrible. But there was no joking about with those guys. They had been there, they had done that, and there was no nonsense to satisfy them. From the first day in the Marine Raiders, we were on a very, very rigid schedule to learn the weapons of war. We got familiar with the rifle, the machine gun, we call it a Tommy gun, 60 millimeter mortars, hand grenades, and hand-to-hand combat, bayonets. And we learned how to fight day or night. And besides the weapons, we simulated going on patrol at night, no lights in the mountains. Well, that was a hazardous thing. But also we had to learn how to go without water and without food. That also was a full-time job as long as you were in the Marine. Very little water, very little food, and very little rest, nothing but fatigue and hunger. You learn how to be hungry and tired and suffer. but that was the Marine Raiders, and but we learned how to fight. Hollywood was making a movie about the Marine Raiders, and Randolph Scott was the main actor in it. Well, he spent 2 weeks out there with the Marine Raiders, and he would sit in our theory sessions and practiced with one of his assistants in the movie, throwing the knives. Now, we didn't even have a knife to throw in our Marine Raider training, but they wanted it in the movies. So they gave everybody a knife, and we practiced throwing a knife. Well, so we had this in the movie. We all were in the knife throwing scene, and But Randolph Scott was in there with us for 2 weeks, and he didn't know me, and I didn't know him. But I got to be with him, and I saw him for 2 weeks. But every morning he would come into camp in a limousine. so we were in several scenes with him, but they was really something for 2 weeks. The two-man buddy system, you did everything in a two-man team. Now, number one, you had only half of a pup tent. Your buddy had the other half. And so whatever you did together. As a team, you operated and you functioned. Well, our simulated patrols was hazardous. We very walked all down up on mountains without casualties. My buddy became a casualty when he fell and broke his hip. And we were completing the first 6 weeks of our training, and when he broke his hip, and instead of going to the advanced class, they gave me an option. I can wait for my buddy to heal to continue my Marine service, or I can start all over again with a new class. Well, I wanted to keep my buddy, so I chose to wait for him to recover. So I started training all over again. But then came the real problem. They deactivated the Marine Raiders. They deactivated the Raiders. The Raiders became infantry. But the new class did not qualify to go with the Marine Raiders into infantry. They were going into field artillery. Well, I protested. I said, well, now look, I've already gone through this once. I ought to go with my Marine Raiders into infantry. No, you're going with the newcomers into field artillery. So I was an angry Marine the rest of the war. We went overseas in November of 1943. And I went over as a fire control in the field artillery. That's how I went overseas. Fire control in the field artillery. Went overseas. Just a real boring 4-day trip with a bunch of women and men, and taking a shower with those salt water, and went overseas, landed in Oahu. One day they took all the field artillery men, transferred them into a field artillery unit. Everybody except me and 3 male men. They said, you're not going into field artillery, you're going to get on a ship. Why are we not in field artillery? Now, the only answer we ever got was, your officer got drunk and left your names off the list. That's the only answer they ever gave us. They just left you off because they were drunk. So we got on a ship. Now this was a real fun trip. We got on a USS Bounty. We four with some other Marines got on a ship, 30-day trip. Now that was a vacation and a half. It was It wasn't a Navy ship, it was just a commercial ship. We ate with the crew, we showered with the crew, and at night we slept up on the deck. Everybody got their guitars out. We spent the night singing old country songs and just really enjoying life. We were just on a vacation for 30 days. And then we landed on Tarawa. Well, just before we left Oahu, the Marines that fought on Tarawa, they came from Tarawa to Oahu. They brought their hostility with them. They tore Honolulu up. We heard about it, we didn't see them, but they tore Honolulu up. They fought the Japanese, they tore up their shops up. They were so mad. Well, when we landed in Tarawa, we saw why. We saw why. Just a very, very small island. The intelligence, they did not describe Tarawa at all. They said it's just a very small island. Just how you have to do is just land and take over. Instead, about 4,000 Japanese died and 900 Marines died. That whole island was covered with empty shells and shrapnel. You could walk on shrapnel and shells. You could never touch the sand. It was covered literally with empty shells and shrapnel. Well, we were there for 2 weeks. I just roamed that whole island, and I saw I got the image of a child's sandbox with a few match stems sticking in it. That was my view of Tarawa, covered with bullets, empty bullets. And we were there for about 2 weeks. One night we had an air raid. Well, they had told us where to go in case of an air raid. So I went from my tent to that foxhole in about 5 seconds. Zip, barefooted. Took me 30 minutes to get back when the Japanese could not find the island. So really, they didn't fire anybody. So when the air raid was over, I knew what was covering the ground there, all those empty shells and shrapnel. It took me 30 minutes to get back to my boat. Now, the Japanese tried to bomb us twice. 2 different nights they tried to bomb us. And well, we could hear those bombs coming down. And that's a terrible sound. That 6'4" lieutenant, when we heard those bombs coming down, we immediately hit the deck in that director pit. Well, I had my head down and out on my knees. That 4-footer, he had his head between my legs and behind, and his legs were going like this. His legs were going just like this. It was trying to become an unborn baby. None of those bombs that they dropped on us exploded. My only thing was, because they were unarmed, they did not arm them properly when they dropped the bombs, so they didn't explode when they hit the ground. That's the only explanation why those bombs did not go off. If they'd gone off, we'd have been wiped out. And then we got on another ship, went about 90 miles southeast to an island called Alabama. Now there was paradise. That water was so deep and so clear, it looked like our ship was floating in air. That island was so beautiful. beautiful shoreline, beautiful coconut trees, palm trees. It was a paradise. All adults wore either grass covered around their hips, or some of them had cloth material around their hips, nothing above the waist. Nothing above the waist. Men, women, little children, most of them went naked. But they lived in grass huts, and every day they all went swimming in that clear water. They were the happiest people I ever saw in my life. All we had to do, if we wanted a coconut, just tell them, I sure would like one of those. They'd walk. They didn't climb the coconut tree. They walked up those coconut trees. How many do you want? They'd throw off as many as you wanted. Then they would come down. They would take the husk off of it, and then they would punch a hole in the skin to drink the coconut milk. Or if you wanted to eat the meat, they would cut the coconut skin, and the coconut meat was just like cantaloupe. Most delicious taste. I had never tasted fresh coconut meat. Delicious. The coconut milk, delicious. And they would come and tent our tents and sit and talk with us. Sit and talk with us. They were just so beautiful. And we were there for about 4 months. While I was there, I was now assigned to anti-aircraft. I never fired a shot. I never trained at all. For all the time I was on Alma Mama. I just enjoyed paradise. And one thing I really did enjoy, though, was the company that I was in. That 4 months. The people. And then they told me at one time Tara was more beautiful than Alma Mama. More beautiful. More beautiful. Then we got another 30-day trip.
Where'd you go there?
We left Alma Mama, and we went to Kauai this time. And there I began to train as an anti-aircraft. That's where that started. Oh, in the anti-aircraft, we had a director, we had a height finder, had a radar, 2 generators, 4 90-millimeter guns, and a 50 caliber machine gun. Now the director pointed and directed the direction and the firing of the guns. The men would put the shell in the gun, but the director would set the fuse and the direction of the guns, and aim and time the shells when they were fired. So on Okinawa, we had nothing but clouds, so we were just pure radar. And so the azimuth director, he had to just follow one line. I had 2 lines, the angle and the distance. And anyway, I was the angle, and he was and the other one was the azimuth. Baker Battery, when we left Alma Mama, we were Fox Battery. When we landed in and the Kauai, we became Baker Battery. But by practice, and then by combat, we were identified as the #1 anti-aircraft anywhere, no matter where. We became the very, very best. And we did that for almost a year on the island of Kauai. We did that every day, every day. But we practiced with live targets. Our airplanes would pull a sleeve, full speed, and we'd practice shooting at that sleeve. Well, we shot those sleeves down. Nobody else, those other batteries, they never shot them down. We shot them all down. Well, in my lifetime, I created a lot of enemies, and they would tell lies about me that I made some comments. I did badmouth some people, but I was courted with people that I didn't even know. Now, I didn't even know Reuben Rubel, but they told him that I said he couldn't punch his way out of a wet paper sack. Now, I told a lot of men that. I told a lot of men, you couldn't punch your way out of a wet paper sack. And I meant it when I told them. I didn't even know him. But somebody told him that I said that about him. So I was sitting in my bunk. 3 men came in and pitched a pair of boxing gloves in my lap. I said, well, what is this? He said, well, you told Reuben Rubel he couldn't punch his way out of a red paper sack. He's going to show you he can. So I put on my boxing gloves, went out into that street. You got a picture of that street. There, the whole camp was there. They're going to watch Reuben Rubel show how he punched bags as a boxer. He was a Golden Glove boxer in New Jersey. Well, he had on boxing gloves and I had on boxing gloves. We were surrounded. Well, I told him how the North Side boys in Fort Worth settled arguments. I gave him the whipping of his life. In about 2 seconds, I had him down on, he was still on his feet, but his shoulders were on the ground and he was holding his boxing gloves up in front of his face. Well, that fight was over pretty fast. But he never challenged me again, and nobody ever threw any boxing gloves in my face either.
You always tell the story of one of your friends who used one of the little porta potties, but got a little surprise of his own. Tell us about that.
When we landed on Okinawa, we had one street, one red, clay, muddy road. Our only rest station was a hole about a foot wide. It was a hole dug straight down about 4 feet with a box sitting on it. Nothing around it, just the box. So you sat there in broad daylight with a hole in the box, in that hole in the ground. That was our portable toilet. You know, there's nothing portable about a hole in the ground. But every morning, our sergeant would pour fuel oil down in that hole and burn out that hole. Well, one day they found a 50-gallon drum of Japanese aviation gasoline. He thought, well, he'd just saved that fuel oil, pour aviation gasoline down in that hole. So that's why he just poured it down in that hole and didn't have a match, so he went back to his tent. Well, here came a Marine. he had to go to the bathroom, so he sat down on that box, smoking a cigarette. He got there, smoking a cigarette, threw it down that hole. He became a missile, blew him 50 feet off that island into a rice paddy. Burned all of his clothes off and most of his skin.
My goodness.
He was in the hospital for a month till he grew some skin back, and then he rejoined the outfit.
Oh my goodness.
I wrote a letter home several times saying, "Mother, we're starving to death here. We have no food. We're having no food. Send us something to eat." Well, I got 2 shocks. One of them, she sent us little old tin cans of either hash or stew, just exactly like what we ate. That's what we got, 90% fat. The other shock was what she cooked and sent was filled with maggots. Nothing but maggots. Didn't matter whether it was cake or candy or whatever. Nothing but maggots crawling around in it.
Oh my goodness.
Now we had 3 lieutenants. One of them was 6'4". I hated him. We had another one. He had a whole lot of pride. I hated him too. We had one. He was really something special. He had been a professor in an all-girls school. He talked like a woman. He looked like a girl, looked like a woman. But no matter what we did, he would do it with us. If we were digging sand out of the beach to load a dump truck, he would dig sand with us. If we were filling sandbags, he would fill sandbags with us. If we were digging a ditch to line our electric cable, he would dig those ditches with us. We really respected him. He did not try to show how his Lieutenant Bars, he was just a Marine at heart, and we really did like him. But one day we were in a theory class, he was teaching it, and suddenly the air was filled with a very nauseous odor. And he paused and he said, "Somebody fluffed."
Oh my.
That was my lieutenant that I really did, and I really respected, and I really did admire him.
Before you landed on Okinawa, they warned you about the very poisonous snakes they had on the island. One night you were sleeping and you felt something slither across your legs. Tell us about that.
Before we left the ship at Okinawa, they told us now, Okinawa has some very, very poisonous snakes. And this island is just covered with rice paddies and all kinds of ground that is covered with snakes. All of a sudden, I was in my pup tent, and wet. We lived wet. And suddenly, when I was in my sleeping bag, laying on my sleeping bag, I felt something walk across my leg, just sliding across my leg. I thought that snake must be 20 feet long. He just kept crawling and crawling and crawling. Just soon as I felt him get off my leg, I jumped up and jumped out the middle of my tent, ran, "Snake, snake, snake!" There stood the whole camp. The sergeant had pulled a wet rope across my leg. Once again, I became the butt of the Baker battery.
Oh boy. Tell us about your thoughts about landing on Okinawa and getting into that battle. What were your thoughts on your way there?
Well, that was a miserable 30-day trip. It was a troop ship. You just stacked, and you slept stacked. The ship was cramped. You got to take a saltwater bath once every 3 days. The food was lousy, that you ate standing up in shifts, and that you ate where somebody else had probably thrown up before you. And that was just a lousy 30-day trip that we hated every minute of it. But we were been glad to get back on that ship once we hit on the island of Okinawa when we saw what was there. That was one lousy mountain-filled island filled of Japanese and natives. We saw the island when we docked. We docked in the ship, and we got out off that ship and landed on the island. And that was the bay was just filled with ships. But that island was nothing but red clay from the shore to the top of the mountains. It was just red clay. And it was just raining, monsoon season, all the time we were there. We never saw daylight without the clouds. Without the clouds. All the troops landed April the 1st, but by the Japanese tactics, the battle then started on April the 4th. That's when it actually started. So we landed, and we were involved in the first day of battle. Okay. But that was the aircraft, and on the land too. That's when the Japanese started. They started the battle to fight the troops on April the 4th.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were there for the full 77 remaining days.
The full 80 days, yeah.
80 days.
Yeah. And then the aircraft, our object was to protect the ships from the kamikaze planes that flew overhead. And so we had the radar that we used. If what we picked up on radar, that's what we shot. And we saw 4 Japanese that we shot down, but they were on fire. We saw them when they got out of the cloud. They on fire landed on Yontan Airfield. We saw them crash and burn.
When you landed, your Baker Company, where did you take your position?
We were on the top of the mountain, overlooking the bay, and our first responsibility was to protect the ships that were unloading. They are all constantly, during that whole battle, they were constantly bringing in supplies, replacement supplies, fresh food, and that's what shocked me. They brought in food that the Marines didn't believe in eating. We didn't get any of that. What we ate, those little old tin cans of stew or hash. I could eat the stew, but I couldn't eat the hash. But I had a friend. He would trade me his stew for my hash. But that's how that. All the thing we got to eat was the Navy. As they landed in their little old boat, they would give us food. One day, me and a friend asked for food. They gave us a gallon can of pears. We sat right there on their boat and ate that gallon can of pears. Well, when we first landed there at the bay, on the mountain just east of us, there were some Marines with dogs. Now every night, they'd go down in that valley on patrol looking for the Japanese. Well, we'd hear those dogs barking, and we'd hear the shots fired. Well, one day, one morning, we went over to that camp, and I just talked to one Marine there. There he sat in front of his tent with his dog, he's drinking a beer. And wasn't very communicative, though. He didn't talk very much, but you could tell he'd been going up and down that valley there at night. You could tell by his appearance, his clothes, his appearance. He'd been one of them. From the April the 4th till they surrendered, every night, the Japanese came high, they came low. But Youngstown Airfield was a real problem for that's what the Japanese were trying to bomb. They wanted to bomb Youngstown Airfield.
And your job was to protect the airfield?
Youngstown Airfield. But then when the Youngstown Airfield, our B-25 started taking off, we watched those B-25s start, one B-25 every 20 seconds for several hours. And when the bombers got up, then the fighters, every two fighters every 10 seconds would take off till they were all up in the air. And then they'd go to Japan, drop their bombs, and late in the afternoon, they'd come back. They'd come back. They really did try to bomb Youngstown Airfield because of the bombers that took off from Youngstown Airfield. Yeah. Now, how successful we were is no plane except one ever bombed Youngstown Airfield. And the only time that one time bombed Youngstown Airfield was because our headquarters would not allow us to fire.
Why was that?
We have what we call identification friendly force. This plane had IFF. So we asked permission to fire. They said, no, he has IFF. We said, well, he might have IFF, but that's a Japanese plane. Now, as far as you could hear a Japanese plane, you could tell it by the sound of the motor. That was a Japanese plane. Just as different as it could be, just as soon as we heard it, that's a Japanese plane. They didn't believe it. He flew in, bombed Youngstown Airfield, and he flew back.
At nighttime and during the day, you heard the battle going on. Tell us about the sounds that you would hear and the battle down below.
During the day, there was no sound during the day. We were unloading ships and standing guard duty. The Japanese did not come during the day.
So tell us about what were the sounds like at night, the battles that you could hear.
Well, just for example, we had 4 90mm guns. Every target we fired at, each gun fired 10 rounds. So every target we fired 40 rounds, 90mm, continuously. Of course, the Japanese came in waves, so that one wave would come, and then there'd be a pause. Then another wave would come, and then that'd be continued till we shot them all down. Then the pause. That was all night long. Just wave and pause, wave, pause, wave, pause. They kept sending them. But all night long, you can imagine hearing all those 40 rounds all night long. No ear protection, none, none. And at night, we couldn't see up, but we could look across. We could see the bay. But every night, those kamikaze pilots were attacking those ships. Those kamikaze pilots got. Well, my impression was I was looking at a birthday cake covered with candles. It looked like all those candles were lit on a birthday cake. That's the impression I got of those ships out on the ocean. Every night. Every night. That's how successful those kamikaze pilots were. One B-25, he was taking off north, and he never to get off the ground. He just went off the edge of the runway, down into the ocean, and died.
Oh boy.
So that was 3 American planes I saw crash. I came in off of a work detail just about sundown, and like I said, I just knew hunger and fatigue. Well, I just crawled into my tent, flat on my back, and just as I laid down, a bullet went right over my nose. I could feel the draft. I could feel that draft. It went from head to foot. If I'd been sitting up, it'd gone right through me. Well, like an idiot, I jumped up and stuck my head out the tent door. My sergeant, my tent was right in front of mine. He did the same thing. It went right through his tent. If I'd been sitting up, it'd gone right through me.
My goodness. Oh my.
You know, if that was a bullet, why would I sit up? Obviously. But anyway, that lieutenant that I liked, he was wounded by a shot in the back, and I know that there was a sniper trying to shoot him. That's like he tried to shoot me. Only he had not laid down yet. He had not laid down yet. Shot him in the back, and he got a Purple Heart. Now, I was trained as a Marine to kill. I learned how to do that very well. One night, though, we shot a troop plane down that crashed right below our camp. We went down there to see what they looked like. I saw about 15 or 20 young Japanese boys. They all looked like they were about 6 feet tall, dressed in brand new uniforms. But they all looked like they were about my age. I had my 20th birthday on Okinawa. I thought, here these boys are. They don't live here, neither do I on Okinawa. They've got parents waiting for them to come home. I do too. Their parents will never see them again. Their parents prayed for them. My parents prayed for me. Now their boys are dead. Well, I couldn't look at all of them. One man I found, I was pushing branches aside, and I thought, this is a funny feeling branch. Well, there's a man's intestine. I found his hips and his legs. I wonder where the rest of them, about 10 feet away. I found his shoulders and his head. Well, I looked at another one. He had a little slot right between his eyes, but he had no back of his head. Another man, I saw a little slot in the back of his head. He had no face. Another man, his body was there, but he had no head. I saw 2 little old charcoal lumps, black. They had been 2 Japanese boys. I couldn't watch anymore. I couldn't watch anymore. I went back. Right there, looking down, I bowed my head and said, Lord, if you'll get me home, I'll be your witness the rest of my life. And I went back to my tent, and I cried for 3 days. For 3 days. Couldn't eat. Not that we had anything to eat, but I had no appetite to eat. Then I watched the rest of the battle on Okinawa. Didn't bother me shooting down airplanes, but I had a different attitude about what the Japanese were. One of the scriptures in the Bible says, "The earth is Jehovah's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein." I realize now what that means. We might be filled in a world of combat, man killing man. This is God's world. They're all His people. That battle went on and on and on and on. I saw a lot of ships burning. So I smelled dead bodies as they rotted on the ground. We knew that we shot at a whole lot of planes, and we hit what we shot at. Until finally the Battle of Okinawa was over, and then came the response from Japan. They complimented 8th Anti-Aircraft Battalion, Baker Battery, on their ability to shoot down Japanese airplanes. They complimented us on our accuracy. But what we did to them when they dropped the atomic bomb, that didn't really mean anything. We didn't know what it meant. And we just do, at that particular time, we were training to land in Japan. That's totally filled up and prepared to land in Japan. First wave. That's the only thing we owed to the 17th Army. They asked for the 8th Anti-Aircraft Battalion, Baker Battery, to land in Japan on the first wave. That's what they thought of us. I thought, well, I'll never get home. We knew what the Japanese did, getting ready. Well, after reading a book about it after the war was over, I saw I would not have gotten home. The first wave would never have gotten home. Well, we got the news that the war was over, and they gave us some information. They said, now then, Marines, if you've got 2,200 points, you're going to go home. Well, I had 2,400 points, so I could go home. They said, now that if you don't have 2,200 points, you're going to go to China. You're not going home, you're going to go to China. Well, all that scuttlebutt that I heard about the Marines and their China duty, I wanted to go there. So I went up and I told all the officers, instead of going home, I'd like to go to China. And they said, no, you're going home. I think they're one of those, they had all of me they wanted. Every aircraft battery on Okinawa fired. We did not fire one time. But we jumped in our holes and covered up our heads because we got all the shrapnel from all those anti-aircraft guns. Well, that was one of the things. When they started opening the PXs, they started showing movies down there in another area. So we would get on a truck, drive down there, and see the movie. And then we'd get in the truck and go back up to our position. Well, one night we got down there and we watched the movie, but I missed our truck back. So I had to look for a truck that would pass by our position. Finally found one. He said, "I'll let you out down at the bottom of the mountain. I'm not going to drive you all the way up there." So he drove me down to the bottom of the hill, let me out. Well, that was about a mile, still a mile uphill from our camp. Well, I had no weapons. We knew that there were still some Japanese roaming around on that island, but I had to walk a whole mile up that hill. I just knew I was going to get ambushed by angry Japanese. So that's the only time during that whole thing that I really got scared.
Oh, my goodness.
I had no weapon. I was one of the longest mile I ever walked. I was convinced the Marines the greatest military unit anywhere, anytime, for any occasion. They're the best trained, they're best qualified mentally, and they're honored. They're honored by the enemy.
I know the memories never leave you, Dad. What memories bother you the most 75 years later?
What disturbs me most is that sight that I saw there. You never forget that. You never forget that. I see those dead Japanese boys, and feel that hunger, that fatigue. I can feel that. You know, after all that battle, the two things I felt that fatigue and that hunger, and that's what my memory is. How I suffered on that island.
When you landed on Okinawa, how much did you weigh?
175 pounds.
And when you left, when the battle was over, what did you weigh?
Well, when I got home, I weighed 135.
Do you remember the day you saw your mother for the first time after the war?
When I landed in Fort Worth, it was night, and so I figured, well, I won't call them. I'll just ride home and wake them up. And I saw her for the first time when I woke them up, and well, she just cried and cried and cried. And then I had to explain to her why I didn't have her come pick me up. Then the next night, the whole family was there celebrating our return, you know. And but then there was some more hugging and kissing and crying.
You had the chance to go to Washington, D.C. a few years ago, 3 years ago, and you were honored at there in Washington, D.C. and at a baseball game. And there were other Marines there from more recent wars, Vietnam, Korea, and the war that they've had in Iraq. They looked up to you as a hero. Tell us a little bit about how did that feel to you?
Well, now, being a Marine, no matter where you are, you're honored. People recognize the Marine emblem, and they come up there just to talk to you, and they always tell you how much they appreciate it. I was the only Marine from World War II that was up in Washington at that time. So they recognized the difference in the battle conditions, and but they were Marines, and they knew what the battles were like, and they were all in the battle conditions, and but they honored the Marines of World War II, but we honored each other. We honor each other because we know what every Marine goes through. Every training period is on war condition methods.
I'm gonna,
That's what you train with.
I'm gonna tell this one story. I was blessed to go on that trip with you, and we had some time to go do some sightseeing, and you and I ended up at the Lincoln Memorial. And it started to pour down rain, and we knew that you and I had to get to the bus in 15 minutes. So we knew we had to walk down those slippery steps and in that pouring down rain. And Dad, I remember thinking, I hope I can get you down those steps without you slipping. And suddenly I felt the presence of 3 Marines, and they grabbed you by the arm. And I looked up at them, and they said, "We never leave a Marine behind."
Oh, my.
That's a beautiful story.
It is a beautiful
Well, that's a Marine. That's the Marine. Yeah, yeah. Every day I'm alive. Memories come. Memories come. And you never forget. You never forget them. Some men can't take it. I went through a hospital there on Okinawa. That battle fatigue. Men just couldn't take it. They just couldn't take it. The living conditions and just constant, you know. Mentally, they couldn't take it. I'm gonna tell you what. The main thing is get your life right with God. Your life is going to depend on your relationship with God, and He's going to lead you completely through any situation. You might not live through it, but you will be ready to die when and if it comes. Be ready. The Lord He will lead you all the way through the Marines. In hindsight, I saw where He was directing my life. I did not leave those raiders by chance. I did not leave field artillery by chance. I did not survive anti-aircraft by chance. I did not survive World War II by chance. The Lord told Japan, Lowe's coming. They said, we give up.
Oh, Dad.
Well, it tells me I give my very best to the United States of America, which is my country. But I give my life to make it the best it can be. That's the message I try to live. I'm giving my very best to this country. I'm proud that I was a Marine. I've never regretted being a Marine.
Mom, I have one last question to ask, and I'm going to ask you, what does this Marine mean to you?
I think he's everything. I think he's all of the things that God wanted him to do, and he made it. And I think he's wonderful. I think he's wonderful, and I love him so much. I tell him about 3 times, I'll tell him about 20 times, I love you in the home. He just walks by and I say, I love you. And I do. I just think he's wonderful. And I'm so proud of him for being a Marine and for all that happened while he was there. I wish I'd have known him, but I didn't. I always tell him if something that he's saying something about it, I say, I should have been there. I just should have been there. I just was tell you what to do, you know. But anyway, he's just precious and wonderful, and I love him.